Hey everyone, the article I've reviewed this week is The Legalization of Marijuana, an analysis into the economic impact on Colorado's economy by Thorpe and Lean. So on January 1st, 2014, the commercial sale of marijuana became legal and in essence became the first market of its kind that was regulated and taxed in the world. The authors decided that what they wanted to do was to first evaluate what were the effects of legalizing marijuana on the economy of Colorado. So they conducted a literature review which returned the following results. Biggest impact on the economy was that they generated a huge amount of tax revenue, although smaller than what they had estimated, which can be justified as this was the first time a market like this had been created. The second one was that they created a lot of judicial savings as it was no longer criminal. And the third one, there was a large overall reduction in crime. So now that the authors had established this, they developed a research question based around, well, knowing that these are the results, would other American states, specifically Kansas, look to adopt legalizing marijuana in a similar fashion to that of Colorado? So they went about acquiring this information through a survey, and a survey which would return quantitative results. So it was a 10-questionnaire survey which was administered through a SurveyMonkey through either an email or a social media platform which would then give a link to the online SurveyMonkey. The researchers relied upon a snowballing effect to get their responses, whereby after one respondent had finished the survey, they were encouraged to pass it on to someone else. Okay. Authors did acknowledge that this brings in a sampling bias as we're likely to associate with people with a similar view. Unfortunately, the researchers didn't elaborate or state how long the survey was open for, nor did they elaborate on how they chose the first person, okay, or through which social media platforms this was done. So of the 448 responses returned, 72% were male, 28% female, 45.1% were between the ages of 25 to 34, 38% were between the ages of 18 to 24, and there were no respondents over the age of 75. 43% of respondents sympathised with the Democratic Party, whereas only 11% were the Republican Party, which is interesting given that Kansas at the time of the survey was under Republican state control, thus bringing in some question about whether or not this is a representative sample. The next part of the sample wanted to look at people's views on marijuana. Okay, so 92% felt that the consumption of marijuana is acceptable. 56% said they do not consume marijuana. 13.4% admitted to a daily use of it. But the biggest finding was that 93% of people were in favour of legalising marijuana, and of that, 67% believed it would have a positive effect on the economy. So from this, the authors also extrapolated or looked into the data a little bit more closely, and they found that those most in favour of legalising marijuana were 25 to 35-year-old males who favour the Democratic Party and do not consume marijuana. Whereas on the other side of those against it, which was only 38 of the respondents, they were between the ages of 18 to 24. They believed it unacceptable to consume marijuana, sympathised with the Republican Party, and therefore they were not consumers of marijuana. When asked about economic impacts or economic factors which would influence a respondent's decision to vote in favour or against marijuana, the two largest factors that came back from the survey was that they wanted to see an increase in tax revenue and also a reduction in crime, which is interesting because they are the two big results of the literature review. So from just looking at that, you would conclude that the people of Kansas, from an economic point of view, would be quite in favour of legalising, as it would likely produce a similar result. However, I think there needs to be a lot of caution with interpreting these results, as there are multiple issues with the paper, namely the largest one being the small sample size. Only 448 respondents of a population of 2.9 million is not a very representative sample, nor is the demographic characteristics of that sample either. The authors also they conclude by saying that overwhelmingly the people of Kansas want marijuana legalized. However, I think this is misleading given there was only 448 people surveyed, and when they compare this to being a 38% difference to that of Colorado, a poll in Colorado returned a 54% response in favour of it. But what the authors don't don't elaborate on is that nearly 3 million people, or 2.5 million people in Colorado were surveyed, whereas in Kansas there was just 448. So I think a more apt name for this study would be, what are the views of 25 to 35-year-old male Democratic voting men in Kansas in respect to the legalization of marijuana?